everything set up here. We'll be going in a few seconds. Make sure you share this on your timelines. Tag somebody in it. Let them know that we're on right now. We got an important topic coming up tonight too, so would love everyone's participation. All right, let's get started here. Hey folks, welcome into another episode of A Nichols Worth. I'm your host, Keaton Nichols. Make sure you check me out on the socials at Keaton D Nichols. That's at Keaton, the letter D, Nichols. You can follow the show at A Nichols Worth. You can plug it into your Googles if you like, but our archives are kept on YouTube and on Facebook. Also Spotify and Anchor as well. Shout out to our sponsors before we get going, parkourtherapy.com, where you all can go work on that summer bod right now. Parkourtherapy.com. You get a free 7-day trial to get started. Parkourtherapy.com. All right, so what's happening in the news coming up off of this Monday? I do want to talk a little bit about the stage at which the Derek Chauvin trial is at right now. Jury deliberations have begun officially as of today. So we'll talk about what the impact, because we're probably going to get a decision this week, what the impact of his possible verdict is, or what it could be, or what it kind of is meant to be in a sense. But anyway, before we get to that, for those of you that tuned in on Friday, first of all, thank you. You guys are great. Appreciate you doing that. But if you didn't, it's okay. I do want to get you up and update you on a story that I talked about on Friday as being potentially impactful, and it does sort of tie into what we're going to be talking about today as well. So without further ado, let's get to it. Make sure you give us a share on your timelines if you are watching this live, and because you never know. Make sure you leave your comments as well. I am open to any and all comments during the course of the show. I'll do my best to read them for you whenever I see them up here on the screen. So I welcome the conversation. If you missed it on Friday, several House Republicans led by one Marjorie Taylor Greene and one Paul Gosar of Georgia and Arizona respectfully are forming a caucus. That's what the news was on Friday. They were forming a caucus that called for a common respect for uniquely Anglo-Saxon political traditions, a sort of alternate version, if you will, of saying a common respect for white traditions in this country. Anglo-Saxon political traditions is not exactly so thinly veiled language for that kind of thing, but nonetheless, a policy platform for this group that was calling itself the America First Caucus, if it ever got to that point, was circled around Washington, and the media got a hold of it, and so on and so forth. Right now, Marjorie Taylor Greene is supposed to be responsible for this kind of thing. According to her spokesperson, the America First Caucus idea is over before it even started. According to her spokesperson, she's not planning on launching it at this time, adding in that it was, quote, in the early planning stages, but that the publication of the document by Punchbowl, which is the media outlet that I guess published this thing, blew it all up. That's according to Marjorie Taylor Greene's spokesperson. Now, most of the Republicans whose names were rumored to have been involved in some way, shape, or form crafting or drafting or claiming that they wanted to be a part of this America First caucus that was forming are now beginning to sort of back away. Whoa, we didn't have anything to do with that. I didn't really mean that I was going to join it. I didn't even see it. I don't even know what it is, right? Just some of the responses that we've heard from some of the folks that were named, if you will, in this story to begin. Now, alleged co-founder Paul Gosar of Arizona, as I mentioned, said he won't be joining the group, opting instead to keep pounding the conservative payment in the Freedom Caucus. Now, the Freedom Caucus already kind of stands on the fringes of the Republican Congress, or Republican congressmen, I should say, already kind of just getting close to those fringes. Not quite there yet, but the Freedom Caucus absolutely represents that in Congress. Gosar's already a part of it. He says has nothing to do with this America First thing going on. Okay. Interesting sort of turn of events in just a couple of days once the wind kind of got out about this. Remember, there were two Republican congressmen that said that they were actually willing to join this if it did become a thing. Lou Gohmert and Matt Gaetz, who, of course, Matt Gaetz is in a whole heap in a world of trouble in and of himself. We'll save that for another podcast. But there were already members of Congress, Republican members of Congress like that were like, maybe we should join the America First thing and protect these Anglo-Saxon traditions. Maybe there's some there with this. Anyway, one of the Republicans who spoke against Green and Kozar's alleged America First caucus was Freedom Caucus's own Kevin McCarthy of California. Now, the reason why I mentioned him, he actually ties into our next story. He mentioned on Twitter at the time of this whole debacle last Friday when the news got out about this, that this America First caucus could be forming. He mentioned on Twitter that the GOP is not the party of nativist dog whistles. They're not going to fall for this whole, Marjorie Taylor Greene thing, right? Like, she's like one of these QAnon conspiracy theorists, thinks that Muslims that were elected to Congress are a part of the deep state Islamist theory, attack theory against the United States. Like, that's how wild and crazy Marjorie Taylor Greene is. But as I mentioned on Friday, let's not mistake that in January of this year, 2021, Marjorie Taylor Greene was elected to the United States Congress. These people who are on the fringes of reality in this country are no longer on the message boards and no longer just staying hidden on the fringes of society. They are now a part of the groups that are quite literally making the rules about where we live and what we do. Kind of all ties in when you think about some greater ideals. Now, even though McCarthy on Friday said, look, the GOP is not it's not the party of nativist dog whistles. In other words, we do not support what this Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene is saying. We don't like that. Okay, now to see how phony and fake politics are, here's the 360 that occurred by today. McCarthy, that same person from the GOP that tweeted out that the message against Green, is now backing Green after she made calls to censor another congressperson, Maxine Waters. Now, you may have heard of Maxine Waters. If you're unfamiliar, just do a quick Google. She's been in Congress for forever, like literally. But anyway, she's a black woman from representing California. And she holds a lot of weight. Republicans love slinging mud at her. Anyway, McCarthy is now backing Green, as I said, after Green made calls to censor Maxine Waters for her comments about the Derek Chauvin trial over the weekend. So you're probably thinking, wait. All right, it's a lot of he said, she said. What exactly did Maxine Waters say that was so inflammatory? Well, here's what she said over the weekend. And when asked in response to a reporter that said, what will you do, or what should people do if they don't, or what will people do rather if the quote-unquote wrong verdict comes back in the Derek Chauvin trial? What do you think the people should do? And Maxine Waters came up with a pretty good response, in my opinion. But let's break it down because not everyone necessarily saw it like that. Waters said over the weekend in response to what should people do, she said, we've got to get more confrontational and we've got to stay on the streets and we've got to get more active about addressing police brutality against black people. Yes, that's what I'm talking about, Maxine Waters. This is a representative of Congress, who is sometimes tied to the far left. It's a whole political thing. I don't want to get into it. But anyway, Waters said this. And because of her position of where she is in the party, it was taken as some sort of threat. Grounds to incite a riot. That's what Republicans are now claiming, including McCarthy, who spoke out against Green and her wild behavior earlier this year, is now saying, well, Maxine Waters, we ought to consider censoring her. We ought to consider stripping her of her power in Congress for these comments, saying we've got to get more confrontational here. Now, before we take a deep dive into it, you should understand that this is not a confrontational thing. Maxine Waters did not incite some sort of riot. Maxine Waters did not incite anybody to take any sort of action that could be harmful to people, places, or things in this country. Let's just establish that right here. Where does this come from? We talk about political games all the time. In case anyone wanted to know where this comes from, it does seem to be some sort of retribution from the Republicans against Democrats, since the Democrats charged the Republicans back in January of basically helping to incite a riot through Donald Trump, who was the riot leader, if you will, that led to the January 6th storming of the Capitol. That's right. The Democrats said, they pointed to Trump and said, you were responsible for inciting this riot. So now the Republicans, all with this egg on their face, having to defend this idiot president of theirs, are now fighting back in the only way that they know how. When Waters says this, that we need to get more active and confrontational, they now take this as a threat, mobilizing the people in a peaceful way that has never been violent, unlike the January 6th riots, right? That has never been violent. That is not inciting any sort of riot. But the Republicans would like you to think of it that way. The Republicans would like you to think that if people go into the streets and protest what would be an absolutely abhorrent decision by the jury, the Republicans are saying, you don't really have a right to do this. Everyone else has a right to do it, but the people that will be protesting this decision, and I think we know who and what those people look like, right? Those people are not allowed to express their distaste for what happens in this trial. Now, January 6th, totally different story, but that's where we are with this petty politics coming in here. Now, you should know that the judge in the Derek Chauvin trial actually condemned these comments too, saying that it kind of opens the door to an appeal from the defense if the verdict doesn't go their way. So just something to note. Judge Cahill in this case deciding to not sequester the jury, meaning that they can go freely wherever they want in between the times that they're going to be deliberating this case. However, he said, look, Maxine, you probably shouldn't have done that. Now, the timing can be argued here, but Waters does bring a lot of truth to what she said. Protests do need to go further. And while it goes without saying, that doesn't mean, of course this doesn't mean it, but I have to say it anyway, that doesn't mean causing more physical destruction or more harm to the people of Minnesota, including the cops. Nowhere in the script does anything call for that. Many people are saying that Maxine Waters' comments sort of referenced the civil rights era that she herself lived through and fought through herself. And that activism certainly took on a different tone. It's oftentimes compared to today's activism, which is not quite the same. It's almost incomparable, the two of them. Anyway, activism in the sense of going back to what she said, that we need to go further, that the protests need to do more. We need to go further with these protests. The entirety of the comments she wrapped up by saying, we've got to make sure that they know that we mean business. That aspect is about putting pressure on those who are responsible to do the right thing in so many ways. No, we're not talking about throwing a rock through somebody's window, but specifically using our ability to gather and to protest to put pressure on those to do the right thing. Protests in 2021, the protests that hit the streets, I mean, we had a huge one last year after George Floyd was killed here in this country. They were certainly impactful. I don't think that people who lived through moments like that are easily or quickly going to forget the impact of what happened during those protests. Certainly not. I don't think anyone is. But I think it's safe to say that these protests in 2021 don't have the same impact that they had during Maxine Waters' day. So we do have to do more. We have to do more. That doesn't mean piling up and doubling down on the strategies that we've already tried. It just means that we need to find more ways to replace the leadership that we have now. That only ensures that this culture of policing and other things that we talk about oftentimes on this show remain in place. That means we got to vote out the Mitch McConnells. We got to vote out the Ted Cruzes. We got to vote out the Kevin McCarthys of the world, of Congress. But at the same time, on the other side of that coin, the Nancy Pelosi's of the world, the Chuck Schumers of the world, and yes, eventually the Maxine Waterses of Congress, they've also got to go too. Because it's a collective that has led us to this moment. It is not the actions of individuals in Congress that have prevented real and true police reform from happening in this country. It's not the leadership of one or two people. It's of the collective. They, as a collective, have to agree that this is the way that business will be done with policing, in this country. This is what they've decided. And so if the entire group, as a group, they've decided this, then they've all got to go. Everybody. Those that put party above the interest of the people, they got to go. those that are more concerned with winning their next election than they are about protecting the very citizens of the places that they represent. They've got to go. I don't care if they're Democrats. I don't care if they're Republicans, independent, anything. The entirety of Congress ensures that this culture of policing remains intact. And so, again, it's another reminder that we cannot forget why we are voting when we vote. It can't just pop up at the polls and expect that somebody has some sort of drive and pull to make a difference in that case. We've got to discuss this as it comes along. Let me get to some of my comments before we get into the Chauvin trial conversation. If you want to leave a comment, just let me know what you think in the comment section. I'll try and do my best to read it for you during the show. M Extra comments in on the Periscope on Twitter. Shout out to my Twitter listeners right now. He says, or this person says, I think it's he says, problem is we keep electing old, out of touch people in political offices. He goes on to say, exactly, Democrats and Republicans is not the answer for the people. I've oftentimes made this point that we have a serious problem with a two-party system in this country. Not that we're incapable of choosing between two options, but we have a two-party system problem in this country in that these two groups must work together for the country to function. And what they have done is sort of put interests of the party in getting along and making sure that everyone gets elected next term over the interest of the people. And that is the problem with the two-party system, in my estimation. And to your first point about electing out-of-touch people in political offices, I agree. And the process is not started right before, 2-3 months before an election. The process is started now. If we do not want or we do not like the candidates that are provided, then we find other ones. We vote with other ones. I think there's a greater conversation to be had about how we politically organize before we get to the elections. Because by the time we get to the elections, it's oftentimes too late. And it's too late to have a conversation about how we can make it better. And so we simply take the lesser of two evils, which perpetuates that cycle that you're talking about, electing old, out-of-touch people to political offices. But anyway, I think you're absolutely right, M Extra. Thank you for listening. And these are the things that we have to continually tune into. Native Man comments in on the Facebook page. He says the party of January 6th insurrection wants to censor a black congressional icon because she told constituents to confront racism. As always, they're inciting fear in the base of their supporters. And Native Man, this goes back to a concept that I talked about a couple of weeks ago on the show about cultural wars that Republicans are going to try and wage on the Democrats, right? Republicans, it's hard to say if they have a, true vested interest in like attacking black women or something like that. I've seen that going around. Probably, but I'm not going to assume that. But, I think the issue with this sort of game that Democrats and Republicans play is that they're constantly wanting to show a sign of something. They're constantly wanting to scare their supporters into believing that their entire party, their entire hype train is worth hopping on. Right. And so a part of the way that you do that, as Native Man said, is to incite fear in the base of their supporters. Right. There's all this talk since January 6th about how certain rhetoric, especially coming from the prior president and the party that supported him, the Republicans, how the rhetoric from that whole side of things basically incited and caused what happened on January 6th. And it's not that far of a stretch either. And so the defense to that for Republicans who now have egg on their face and have had egg on their face at least since January 6th about this incident are now trying to say, look, she's doing the same thing. She's inciting a riot too. She's not. I mean, it's pretty clear and evident. But if you can scare the people into believing that Maxine Waters could potentially threaten their safety, then that's a strike against the Democrats. It's a way for them, the party that's not in power, the Republicans, it's a way for them to sort of get back. And I'm sick of games like that. I don't care about games like that. Represent me. I'm here. Represent me. Don't represent your own interests. So anyway, great comment, Native Man. I appreciate it. And M Extra confirms he is a man. Thank you for commenting in. If you want to leave a comment, let me know in the comment section as well. I got one from Instagram too. Quentin Hooper, my homie Quentin. He says, I love to take on politicians that are in office as a collective is why we are in the position that we are in, and they have to go, Democrat or Republican. I agree with you, Quentin. You get no argument from me, most certainly on that. I think that a fresh restart is more than needed, flipping over the tables and saying, look, if we have to start from the ground up, let's do that. But we can't, in my estimation, we can't afford to live with the same leadership that we have now. It might literally kill us. And that's not hyperbole, by the way. That's literal. It might literally kill us. So appreciate it. Leave your comments in if you have a comment. Let me get on to the story, my main story tonight, if you will. Jury deliberations have officially begun in the Derek Chauvin trial. There have been a lot of people that have kind of like been tuned into this. I actually talked with an attorney friend of mine earlier today. That sounds like super fancy, by the way. I have an attorney friend. I have a few attorney friends, but I am not fancy. Anyway, I was speaking to one of my attorney friends earlier today, and she had mentioned that that she hadn't really been like locked into every detail of the trial. And I wondered if anyone else was kind of like this too, because I felt in many ways that the times that I did tune in, this is kind of like off the beaten path here, but I did want to mention this, that the times that I did tune into the Derek Chauvin trial, whether it was today or throughout the last couple of weeks that this has been going on, all the way back to the jury selection, this process is traumatic. And I don't know if anyone else caught that same energy, but I certainly did. It's hard for me to watch these proceedings, the prosecution, the defense, everyone trying to make this case about this man who is dead, and there's no way that this man should be dead right now, no matter what we are arguing. And that is traumatic. My own experiences with the police give me a sort of personal feel for this. Like, I envision myself in George Floyd's shoes, maybe more than the average individual does. And that reliving his death from different angles and from different perspectives and from different witness statements and things like that is in and of itself traumatic. So as the jury deliberations begin, I don't know if anyone else kind of felt that, but it was hard for me to watch, and I totally understand if people have kind of checked out of this trial and are just kind of waiting on the results. There's nothing wrong with that. This is a tremendously, tremendously traumatic experience. I should say that before we get in. Anyway, the defense presented its closing arguments today. It was a lengthy attempt, to insert any and all possibility of doubt that George Floyd died from Derek Chauvin's knee on his neck, right? That was the first thing that tried to be, sort of compact into this closing statement. And the other thing, and this is just what I noticed, I'm no legal expert on this stuff, which is just my own notes. More interestingly, I think the other thing that the defense tried to present to the jury today was that Derek Chauvin's actions, no matter what the result might have been, were justified under the pretense of reasonable policing. And that second one is very important. This was no SCOTUS case. This was not a Supreme Court case, but it does, and I think it will impact how police reform will go from here on out in the next couple of years here. It could somewhat hinge on what the jury decides here, because of that last precedent that I talked about, justifying the pretense of his actions under reasonable policing. So we know that there's basically three charges that Derek Chauvin could face here. There's second-degree manslaughter, second or third-degree homicide. Those are the three choices. But there's still a fourth possibility. The fourth possibility, in all of this, is that the jury could possibly acquit Derek Chauvin of all charges, essentially setting him free. Now, if even one of the jurors, just one, is convinced by the defense, or whoever, right? If one of the juries is convinced that Chauvin was simply doing his job, and that job as a police officer so happened to result in the death of George Floyd, if even one juror believes that, or thinks that, or feels that, it'll be impossible to convict Derek Chauvin, meaning that he could walk free for now. That is a possibility. And it doesn't take all 12. It doesn't take 6. It just takes 1. Now, that kind of decision would solidify something very important in this country. That kind of decision would solidify the idea that policing in America is fine. Policing is okay. and that we must accept that sometimes during this institution that we call policing that we are okay with in the country, that sometimes people will die. Sorry. That's what a decision like this could say. If they can't convict Derek Chauvin on anything, even if it's a technicality like that, that will be the precedent going forward, is that as we attempt to reform police in the next couple of years, the idea and the precedent will be set that policing doesn't need to be reformed. Policing doesn't need to be changed. These individual incidents are unfortunate, but policing as a whole doesn't need to be changed. I disagree strongly. I very strongly disagree with that. There's a hard to swallow pill that we have about the United States that we must accept that we are swallowing these pills. And that's that Americans still, and I'm talking about Americans as a whole now, I'm talking about all 350 million of us or however many is floating around here. Americans still respect police a lot more than they respect black people. That is a hard truth to accept, but it is true, and it is true again and again and again, and I can show you how that is true again and again and again. Americans still respect police a lot more than they respect black people, and that's a part of the reason why reform of police and policing in this country has been nearly impossible. See, like Americans, like we get turned off at seeing a police officer, on camera kneeling on a black suspect's neck. Or we sort of cringe and we look away, when an officer reaches for her taser and points the taser at, somebody 3 times before shooting him with her gun, or being choked out by a police officer on camera, or being shot while playing with a toy gun in a park, or being shot, while pulled over with a broken tail light, or being shot as a legal gun owner right there in Minnesota. I mean, I could go on and on and on and on, right? These stories come up, and America acts like they're so sick at what happens. Oh, my goodness. This hurts so much. We need to run a Black Lives Matter commercial before the NBA games tonight to show people how much we're hurt. People are, the Americans are generally turned off by seeing things like this. They are. But also, in general, many people believe that policing in America is aimed at protecting good guys. Policing is here to protect the good people and to punish and to get and to stop the bad people. So if someone dies during an altercation or an interaction with police, then they must have been some sort of bad guy. They must have been some sort of bad actor. And while we don't like to think about that, as much as Terrence Crutcher makes us sick, as much as Eric Garner makes us sick, as much as Breonna Taylor makes us sick, there are plenty of people, way more people in this country, that believe that the job and the idea of policing and keeping the good guys safe is more important and higher above the priority of keeping black people alive in this country. That is a fact. It's been a fact for many hundreds of years. Right here in this country, and we have to accept that. If Chauvin is convicted, it won't guarantee that reform is on the horizon. It doesn't promise that reform is on the horizon if Chauvin is convicted in most districts across the country. But after the summer of protests that we just had, in the year that we had, where everyone was on pause, everyone had an extra time to sort of process the pain of what we were feeling in George Floyd's death. It wasn't just business as usual. Oh, I got to go to work. No, everyone had to process that. Everyone was forced to think about that. After that summer of protests and the long overdue attention that this subject is finally getting, if a jury of 12 in Minnesota can't see the guilt of an officer that was filmed kneeling on George Floyd's neck for 9 minutes, then we are more doomed than you originally thought. Not only do those 12 people not have the best interest of black Americans in mind, but we are pretty much screwed for trying to convince others who are not already convinced. Not convinced already. Good luck on trying to convince those people that change is needed after this decision. Good luck. That's the decision weighing on this decision. It's not about whether or not one more cop is going to go to jail for what he did. That's not what this is about. This is not about whether the individual family of George Floyd will receive justice for what was done to their family member. It's bigger than that. Everyone sitting here watching this, we got to see what happens here. Because if they can't get this one, then we might not ever get one ever again. And I'm not talking about one individual case. I'm talking about get the real reform that we need in this country when it comes to policing. It may never happen, or at least not happen for several more years. And if I know that it's not going to happen for several more years, and I look at the averages of people that are shot and killed by the police and the percentages of them that are black and unarmed and otherwise undeserving of being shot by the police, that's still going to happen for several more years until something else happens. Another monumental event, another sort of country-stopping event happens. Like the killing of George Floyd last year. That's what this decision means. And that's why, if there's any sort of nerves around the decision, that's why I have them, because of what could be weighing in on this. Let's go to the Instagram. A. Martello, my man, is getting into the directing of everything. Make sure you go check out his page. He works with some great theater productions as well. But Martello, I appreciate you joining in. He says, it's definitely my privilege, but I haven't been able to keep up on the trial. I've seen this movie. I know the ending. I just hope I'm wrong. I'm with you on that one. He goes on to say, don't people see that his actions being reasonable policing is a much larger problem? And Martello, the answer to that question is no. People don't see that the bigger picture is that there's a problem systemically with how we deal with these issues. And when we talked about Minneapolis, and their attempt to sort of defund and deconstruct, let's say, the police department in Minnesota, what made that interesting is that is sort of the only way that we could have rebuilt a department, a police, a public safety department, whatever you want to call it, build some sort of entity that is aimed at, instead of aiming at, getting all the bad guys, protecting all the good guys, that it's aimed at something more productive. It's aimed at the preservation of life, the enhancement of life, of us as citizens. That's what was necessary at that level. But the reason why that movement and other movements like the movement in Minneapolis to not defund, but to sort of reconstruct, if you will, the police department, is that there's not enough people that are convinced that this is an issue. Like even the word defund the police brought up all kinds of issues, a lot of them from Democrats, by the way. The reason why that ruffled so many feathers is because there were people on both sides of the aisle, Democrats, Republicans, leftists, rightists, pro-police, anti-police, that were saying, look, we can't get rid of the police. What are you, nuts? Right? Like, they couldn't even get down to the idea of breaking down policing into something that could be rearranged and modified and reconstructed as something positive for many of these communities. People couldn't even get to that point. We couldn't even open up a conversation about that because everyone was so worried about what that might do to the status quo. What might that do to our normalcy, our sense of safety, if indeed we are reactivating this idea called policing here in the country. And I hate to say it, but most of the people who were freaked out by this thing are the people who are oftentimes untouched by the fallacies of policing. Yes, white people. Ask a white person how they feel about defunding the police. 1 out of every 4 might be like, yeah, man, it's probably a good idea. We should start over. But the other 3, good luck. And why is that? Is it because white people are mean and white people just suck? No, it's because white people have always been protected by the interests of police. I mean, this is a simple thing of, look, it's always worked for me and my people, the people that look like me and my family and those that are around me. It's always worked for us. It doesn't work for those people that look like that over there. And I'm trying to understand that, but deconstructing the whole thing, whoa. Let's not do that. I mean, come on, we don't have to throw the baby out with the bathwater. That's where the conversation stops. And a lot of white people are like, I wish I could understand what black people feel according to this. That's where the split happens, right there, when it comes to the skin in the game. When it comes to people of color, many people of color were like, yeah, sure, blow the whole thing up. What have we got to lose? Nothing. We're being killed out here, right? At a massive rate. And it's not just the big stories, rather. It's deeper than that, I know. But we're being killed out here. So, you want to talk about reform? Yeah, let's do it. Sign up. But you talk about somebody who's always been, who this program, if you will, of policing has always been to the advantage of. Why would they want to change that? We still live in a country that is majority white. It is changing every day. It is getting blacker and blacker. It is getting browner and browner by the day. But we still live in a majority white country. If you're asking in a majority white country to deactivate and rebuff the institution that has always protected those people, good luck. Like I said, good luck on it. It doesn't matter how many protests are out on the street, how many white people you see with BLM in their profile bios and stuff like that. Doesn't matter. We know how this, as Martello mentioned earlier, we know how this story goes. We've seen this before. So until we're ready to get to that point, nothing will actually change. But this trial could be swinging on the hinges of the change that we need. But the jury's got to make the right call. Let's go back to, we have an Instagram comment. My homie Gina. Gina comments and says, what are your thoughts on on how the prosecution did? Did they handle the case well and fairly? So I did see a lot of the prosecution's argument. I saw a lot of the defense's argument as well, even though it kind of made me sick. But the prosecution's argument I thought was well done. And again, this is not as a legal expert or anything. I just want to put that precursor out there. But from my observation, right, the prosecution basically presented this case as it should have been presented. Like, there was a man. This is the one thing, real quick, if I could just dip out for a second, I'll dip right back in. The one thing that I saw about this trial, that I kept thinking about this trial, is that this is very obvious, right? Like, this is not like some of the other things that we've seen in court cases where there's like room for error, there's room for doubt. Maybe there's a part of the video that's cut out or whatever, like, or we don't see what happened beforehand or afterward. Something always sort of could possibly cloud the judgment of a juror. With this case, it's so straightforward. All 9 minutes and more are recorded by either witnesses or by other cameras that were filming. This is an open and shut case. This is easy, right? A man kneeling on somebody else's neck. The man who's being knelt on dies of asphyxiation, in so many words. I guess that's the way you put it. I mean, come on, it's like, what other possibility is there? Okay, so let me dip back into it. In terms of the job that the prosecution did in presenting that evidence, I thought it was fantastic. Every single angle was like, okay, if you had doubt that, maybe it was this other thing that could have possibly killed George Floyd, let's bring in as many possible witnesses as we can to go ahead and dispel that theory. Oh, you thought some other nonsense happened on the other side of this? Let's go ahead and bring in some other witnesses that are going to dispel that theory as well. And I thought that the prosecution did a good job of that. Again, not as a legal expert or anything else like that, because I'm not, but those are my observations. I am usually very annoyed I shouldn't say usually, but I am often annoyed at the job that state's attorneys do in cases like this. It's almost like they're trying to be very balanced in everything, and they kind of want to make sure that they're playing by all the rules. And I think that these prosecutors did that, but they also presented a very open and shut case in a very clear way to the jury. This man knelt on George Floyd's neck for 9 minutes, despite the external circumstances of what might have been happening around that before and after. The raw part of it is, the most important meat of that is, a man knelt on another man for 9 minutes, and that man died, period. That's all you really need to know. And anything else, as I mentioned, the defense that they were doing during their closing arguments was attempting to sort of throw doubt in that, right? Anything else could have, even mentioning at one point space aliens as a far-reaching possibility of what could have happened. Space aliens came down and took over, Derek Chauvin's body and caused him to do what he did, right? Even mentioning that. So I think that the prosecution did a really great job in presenting this case. Just because they did a great job, though, doesn't mean that one juror, that's what I'm concerned. I think it's going to be one juror that messes this up for everybody, but I certainly hope it does not. And Gina goes on to say, the only country in the world where we debate if a murder happened when we watched it happen. Right. These prosecutors made me proud AF. And yeah, I mean, obviously you have a very close look at what goes on inside a lot of these places as well. But I with that first part, that speaks to me. The only place in the world where we're watching a murder that happened on camera and we're saying to ourselves, well, the perpetrator is presumed innocent until until guilty. I mean, it's wild to me. That's a part of this trauma that I talked about a little bit earlier, is sitting here watching grown men and women debate about something that I know what I saw. Everybody knows what they saw. And somehow it's still close. Somehow when the decision comes out this week, I'm nervous. I don't know where this is going to go. This is about as obvious as a slap in the face, as a punch right on the nose. Bam. If you can't see that, I don't know what you're doing. I don't know where your face is, man. So it's just hard to watch that and to imagine the family of George Floyd who's probably watching this too. Maybe, I don't know, but maybe watching this too and thinking, this is crazy. Blood oxygen levels, and did he take drugs beforehand? And could have been carbon monoxide poisoning. I mean, it gets really crazy. It gets really crazy. But it's traumatizing to see that a man's life is being so disrespected like this. Derek Chauvin should have gone in that same day with his hands behind his back and walked himself into prison, because he knows he's wrong. But as Gina says, the only country where you can defend yourself against something like that. Just saying. Quentin comments back in and says that space expert juror. Yeah, I don't necessarily know which one it's going to be, but I just have a sickening feeling that that's going to be the case. And that one juror could very well have, a tremendous impact on how policing is figured out from here on out. So, all right, that is all I have for today. Make sure you follow the show at A Nichols Worth. We're on Spotify, we're on Anchor, Facebook, YouTube. Right now, youtube.com/A Nichols Worth, a great place to check out past episodes. If you have more comments on this, throw them in the comment section. I'll try and read them for you on the next show as well. You can follow me at Keaton D. Nichols. Be back on Wednesday with some more politics and news. We may have a decision by that time, so we'll get a chance to talk maybe about some of those things as well. Appreciate everyone for joining in on the stream, and I will see you guys on the flip side.